kind of some general news and notes before we get to those questions. The Bengals have had a very busy week behind the scenes in this bye week, and they've had a number of different workouts. A lot of that news came out Tuesday and Wednesday, and it's at critical positions. Well, some of them are at critical positions that the team feels it needs to improve upon as the second half of the season comes their way. But some others are a little bit odd in terms of who the position they look at, not necessarily the player. Scott, I'd like to start with you. You've knocked, and rightfully so, you've knocked Mike Nugent a bit already this show. The Bengals brought in a couple of kickers to potentially compete or take the spot of Mike Nugent, and a couple of them are Kai Forbath, who ironically used to play for the Redskins, and Randy Bullock, who I believe is a former Saints kicker.
He played, I think, majority on the Texans.
Okay, and then there's Zach Hawker was another workout who used to play with the Bengals this preseason. So they're bringing in guys to check out this week. And Nugent struggled last week. Your thoughts on those guys? Are they an improvement, or should they stick with Nugent based on his ability to rebound after terrible games?
I like it because I think it kind of shows at least they are doing some due diligence. And the guys mentioned, I guess outside of Hawker, the other guys mentioned actually do have some experience. I know when Bullock came out and the Texans drafted him, I remember they even said, and this is going back a few years, that he was going to be their starting kicker come hell or high water. He was that good. They were that impressed with him in college and workouts and preseason. That didn't last very long. They just but they had a ton of faith in him. I think he had a pretty powerful leg and was pretty accurate, really impressed in practices. And I think that's kind of what the Bengals see. The Bengals seem to be a team. You kind of mentioned this with the guys they're not playing, and the guy like with Dunlap in the past and with Dawson, that they tend to look a lot at practice. And I'm under the impression Nugent is probably a huge practice guy, probably nails everything on that practice field outside of Paul Brown. But when game day comes, you don't get to make 40 kicks in a row or whatever. You have to make that one, and then half an hour later you have to make that other one. And that's so I'd be surprised if they sign any of these guys, because they're probably just looking at, hey, let's line up, make a dozen kicks, see how many you make. We'll move to the left, move to the right, move up, move back. But it's not a game time situation. And the guys they looked at all have stronger legs. I don't think their accuracy is much better than Nugent. It's a little better. And the reason why they're probably not much better is you're looking at mid-season. So any chance you would have had to have gotten someone would have been, earlier in the year, either in the draft or in free agency. Now you're at the point where, everyone's kind of picked over everyone, which kickers are having good years this year. They've brought them in, and, some teams have already gone through several kickers. And so by waiting this late, you're essentially kind of taking okay, here's the guys that no one else wants. I really wish they would have been more proactive in the preseason, given that Nugent really hasn't done much for the Bengals since his first year, and he's been below league average for the last 5 years. So that being said, it would have been nice if they would have brought some real competition. Usually it's a Zach Hawker or Tom Oberski, a guy or that John Brown, the guy who had never kicked the field goal in college. It's people who don't really seem to have a legitimate chance to pass them up. It's guys that, okay, they're just, a camp body at a kicker position to help with kickoffs and, occasional kicks and whatever. And, but yeah, I like that they actually are doing something. I think it's probably too little too late with the guys. I think Forbath would have the best chance. I think from what I remember, he had some pretty decent years in Washington. Maybe not phenomenal. I mean, he's not Justin Tucker or Steven Gostkowski, and obviously if he was, he wouldn't be available in the the 8th week of the season. Another guy I don't think they'll bring in, but I think a lot of Bengals fans in hindsight were upset to see them go, is Josh Brown, because he had a great year when Nugent got hurt, and there was the big debate at the end of the season, who do we keep? And a lot of people wanted Josh Brown, and the Bengals were like, nope, Nugent's our guy. He's the guy that's, who we want, who we've had, we're sticking with him. And then I think since then, Brown is in a much better career, except for this year, and that's a whole nother issue. So
Right.
you're obviously glad you don't have him this year. So I was happy to hear them bring guys in.
Didn't keep him around.
I just, if they signed any one of those guys, I would be floored.
Yeah,
I'd be happy, but surprised.
Yeah. Brown was a guy after he left the Bengals. He actually, if I remember correctly, went to the Giants, and I think he missed one field goal the entire year or something. I mean, it was something crazy. And it was like a 50-plus yarder that he missed, and he was just incredible. Now, obviously, I think based on all the stuff that's come out, he's kryptonite. You can't sign a guy like that, even if with Nugent's struggles. Personally speaking, I saw a lot of Kai Forbath out here on the West Coast because he played for UCLA, and he was one of the best kickers in the country when he was playing. The big knock on him, from what I understand, he's got a weak leg on kickoffs. He doesn't have the strongest leg on big, long field goal attempts, but he made quite a few in college and some in the pros. But Mike Nugent himself has proved to be unreliable from beyond 50 yards anyways with this team, and that's not just this year. That's his entire Bengals career. So I would, again, I'm kind of with you. I think Forbath would be the one guy that they might look at to make a change. With Nugent, I don't really see it happening. I think much like some of these other moves, it might be just, the team sending a message to the players that, you know what, we're 3-4-1 and we're not happy. We're not happy with things. We're not happy with certain positions. We're not happy with certain performances, and we got to do something. And we might make some moves here. We might just try and challenge you to step your game up by bringing in these guys. We'll see. Speaking of that, go ahead.
You mentioned Forbath. Up until last year, he had a pretty rough last year. Also to that, he was like 88, 90% field goal accuracy.
Yep.
So, he has one bad year. No one wants him. Nugent's had 5 bad years, and we stick with him. So I'd love to see them bring someone like Forbath in, because even if he can't kick it long, we're, with Nugent, that's nothing new.
Right.
They also brought in Travis Coons. I just want to mention him as a guy. Played last year for the Browns, went 28 for 32. 2 of his misses came from 40 to 49, 2 from 50 plus. I don't know how he uses a kickoff kicker. I think that's also something that is kind of goes under the radar talking about is because Kevin Huber isn't going to kick kickoffs to the Bengals. It's been Nugent predominantly, and so if there's a guy like Forbath, but he can't kick kickoffs, you're downgrading at the kickoff kicker and a kicking position. So I think Coons would be another interesting guy if he was good at kickoffs. I really don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. But you also have to now look at the change in the kickoff rules, and a lot of teams now are preferring to almost not kick it into the end zone, and because a touchback gets you to the 25, and now a lot of times these shorter kicks will get you more to the 15 to 20 yard line instead of the 25 on a simple kneel down. So that's something to kind of, if you want to play a little chess game there. But we all know kicker is the weirdest position in the NFL based on who teams prefer. The same guys get a number of jobs. It's this weird fraternity. And you see guys kick for 10, 15, 20 years, and sometimes you wonder how some of these guys have lasted that long and how some of these other decent guys are still on the street. But we'll see if the Bengals make a move there. Connor, the Bengals did bring in a familiar face for a workout in Wallace Gilberry, which was very interesting to me. Apparently, he did sign with the Lions this offseason as a free agent acquisition. He is, I believe, in his early 30s. I want to say about 32 years old. Spent a handful of years with the Bengals, and a couple of them were productive, a couple of them weren't, but still a valued guy on that defensive lineman. He went to the Lions. Apparently he left with an injury settlement, and the Bengals brought him in for a workout this week. Your thoughts on Gilberry? And we talked about, I think it was Scott that said 50-plus attempts and 1 sack on Sunday. Is Gilberry gonna help in terms of that rotation?
I mean, that's the question that has to be answered, because when you look at the Bengals right now, their whole offseason thing was, they didn't get anyone to replace Gilberry. And then we saw preseason and early season, Marcus Hunt has looked good, Will Clark is pretty good. The Bengals clearly aren't very satisfied with what Marcus Hunt has been doing on the inside. He's had a couple of good plays here and there, and he hasn't really had that many bad plays, but he hasn't had enough good plays to justify keeping him on the field and in nickel packages. And so Obviously, it also has to do with Marcus Hardison being out for the year. I think that the Bengals had plans for him inside and maybe even Andrew Billings. I don't think he probably was inside, but it also shows the Bengals, I don't think, trust Brandon Thompson at all. Because, I mean, not Brandon Thompson, sorry. Brandon Thompson, I think, is an X factor where when he comes back, we'll see what happens. But and maybe that says that the Bengals aren't confident in his recovery process right now. But the guy I'm meant to refer to is Deshaun Williams. I mean, I don't think he's been active for a single game this year, and I know fans love him, but from what I've seen on tape, I still liked Marcus Hunt over Deshaun Williams. He doesn't really seem like a guy who has been able to get that much push in the pass game, which is what the Bengals are looking for in nickel tackle. And so to bring in Wallace Gilberry is kind of a low blow to guys like Will Clark, Marcus Hunt, and the interior players behind Geno Atkins who haven't been getting any push in the pass rush on third downs and obvious passing situations. So to answer your question, I don't think Wallace Gilberry got released. He left on an injury settlement, and so I don't think that on a team that desperately needed a pass rush when they signed Gilberry that the Lions probably, I think the Lions probably saw him and thought, well, even on a team like the Lions where we don't really have a great interior pass rush on passing downs, Gilberry isn't the answer. And so to answer your question, I really don't see why Wallace Gilberry would ever make the Bengals at this point of his career. I hope he seems like a nice guy, but there's no reason for the Bengals to sign him. That being said, something needs to be done. I mean, whether it's better coaching, better execution, the Bengals pass rush on obvious passing downs and third downs has not been where it needs to be. And as much as I've liked Marcus Hunt, he's had a couple of nice hits like we saw in the Cleveland game, and he has the field goal blocks, but he's not a guy who is consistently getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks on obvious passing downs, and that's an issue. And the Bengals tried Will Clark inside this past week, and it didn't work. And who knows, maybe they expand the experiment and try to lengthen it and see maybe if Will Clark is a better option on inside on passing downs. And I know that he's pretty much a liability on the outside when it comes to the run game. So maybe that's an experiment that could work. But right now it's just an issue. And bringing in Wallace Gilberry kind of just shows the desperation the Bengals are at right now. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Yeah, Gilberry was a very productive player for the Bengals when he was a rotational guy, and that's what this defensive line, even with the stars, the two Pro Bowlers and Dunlap and Atkins and Michael Johnson, when he had some good years for this team, that's what this line thrived on in their best years, was still being able to rotate some guys in and make a bunch of plays as you can kind of shift looks and do things, especially on obvious passing situations and things of that nature. And Gilberry thrived in that. Now, when Johnson left, and Gilberry was really relied upon to have kind of a starting type of role, he did not thrive in that. And he's more of a rotational guy and a niche guy. Maybe he comes back to the Bengals and that, being in that scheme that he did have some good years with, maybe that rejuvenates him and it gives the entire Bengals defense a spark up front. But the pass rush needs to be better this year, and the only guys getting pressure are Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins, and even that is a bit inconsistent. Michael Johnson has been basically non-existent this year. I don't know what's going on with him. Not that he's a pass rusher savant, but just not the same player we've seen over the past handful of years in his duties on the right side of the line. So
it's kind of like with Malaluga, because you see that he's a guy who he's better. He's way. I mean, for people who like to be critical of Michael Johnson, he's exponentially better than Will Clark in the run game. Will Clark bites on almost everything, and I think the Bengals don't want him on the field in obvious rundowns because he is not a quality player in the run game, at least at this point. Hopefully it's better, but it's the same thing with personnel is that that when Michael Johnson's on the field, the pass rush isn't going to be as effective. When Will Clark's going to be on the field, you're going to be able to run to his side, and so it's kind of pick your poison with the Bengals defense, and that's a predictable defense. You don't like that.
So aside from those two areas, defensive line and kicker, the Bengals have also kind of seemingly out of the blue, they brought in Marcel Reese, the former Raiders fullback and very versatile player for the Raiders. They brought him in for a workout this week as well, and he's a guy who made 4 consecutive Pro Bowls up until last season. He made a Pro Bowl, but he actually got nailed for performance-enhancing drugs at the end of last season, had to serve a 4-game suspension, and once it was partially last year and partially into 2016. And when he was eligible to return this year, the Raiders released him. He has not latched on to a team, but he's a guy who can block, both run block, pass block, catch the football, and run with the football pretty effectively. Just a very versatile guy, and he's been a good player for a while. I personally like it from the standpoint of adding another weapon to the offense, especially in maybe an outlet in the passing game and anything that can help the pass blocking issues that the Bengals have experienced this year. I just wonder what does that mean? Does that mean Ryan Hewitt's going to see more time on the bench after signing this big contract? Does that mean they plan to use both of them? Does that mean that, they want more of a straight up fullback and Ryan Hewitt can kind of do some other creative things? I just don't know. Maybe they're just kind of, again, showing their players that, hey, we're not satisfied with how things are looking and we need to explore all the options to improve this team and get to the playoffs quickly, guys. I like it. I like the idea. I don't love it. Quick answers from both of you. Scott, do you see a fit for Marcel Reese, and do you like the idea of him being added to the team?
I'd say yes to both. I like it because he's a rich man's Ryan Hewitt, basically, because, like you said, he can catch the ball, and he is a very good blocker. He's been very productive. And I also like it because it's a very un-Bengal-like move. They generally like to add guys to the draft. We kind of keep our own. We sign a guy to an extension. He's our starter. He's locked in. They, as you mentioned, they signed Hewitt to that extension this year. And so normally that would be something where they say, okay, he's our guy. We're pretty well good. We aren't going to replace him. Now they're bringing a guy, could just be a workout, but still, at that position, it almost seems like, wow, maybe they are willing to break at least a little bit from that mindset that, yeah, we aren't always going to say, we gave you the contract, we're just going to live and die with you. So from both perspectives, I'd say I liked it.
Connor, your thoughts?
You can reference the fact that he made 4 straight Pro Bowls or whatever, but to be honest, he's not a Pro Bowl caliber player. I think the Raiders saw that, and that's why they cut him. The reason why he's made 4 straight Pro Bowls is strictly off of name recognition. I'm not a big PFF guy, and I don't have any stats to really talk about Reese, but from what I have digested as a NFL fan, I can tell you that most analysts were not very high on Reese last year. Just from brief stats, Ryan Hewitt last year had 8 catches on 12 targets for 99 yards. I think Reese had 265 yards on 30 something targets. So even as the number 7, 8, 9, whatever target in the Bengals offense, Ryan Hewitt had more than half, or well, I should say almost half the yardage on almost a third of the targets as Hewitt or as Reese. And he's a big name, but I think the Bengals were more just kind of putting out a feeler, and it just shows that the team doesn't trust Ryan Hewitt, and I'm not sure why. And for that reason, maybe Marcel Reese is worth a shot because he, like you guys have said, he's had that potential, or he's been the guy before in his career. But to me, this feels like kind of the Chargers signing LaRon McClain 3 or 4 years ago, back when after he had his pretty prestigious career with the Ravens, and then the Chargers signed him. He was kind of just a name, but didn't really do much. And the Bengals really, Marcel Reese has never been that run-blocking fullback. He's been more of a weapon out of the backfield. And so to me, and my question is, why are the Bengals doing that? Because, you need Jeremy Hill runs better behind a fullback who can block. If you're looking for a guy who can block, why are you looking for Marcel Reese? Because he's as good of a player as he once was. He was never really the run blocker that most fullbacks have been. He's been more of an H-back type of, line up as a tight end at times and catch some passes, but he wasn't that fullback. And I don't think the discussion's going to get to that point. I just want to throw out that I don't know if it was a couple of weeks ago or when it was, but I remember hearing about the Bengals having a little bit of interest in Taylor Mays. And personally, I know that the whole Taylor Mays experiment seems to have come and gone in Cincinnati, and the drug suspension or whatever it was that kept him out of the first few games this year was a big deal. But personally, I would love to see the Taylor Mays signing. Like I was kind of mentioning before, the Bengals really don't have one of those cover guys, and Taylor Mays, we never really got to see the end of the experiment with him as a hybrid linebacker safety type of player. Having him as a money backer like the Dion Buchanan or Mark Barron, I don't know if it's going to work or if it's not going to work, but at this point, it really doesn't hurt to try. You need to change things up, and he has familiarity with the team. He's going to improve special teams because the Bengals' special teams have been abysmal this year. That's a signing that I would love to see. He's actually probably number one on my free agent signing list, unless randomly some team drops an Alshon Jeffrey or Sheldon Richardson or someone. But no, of all realistic targets, I think Taylor May should be number one on the Bengals list. He gives the Bengals the flexibility to have a guy they can put in coverage as a hybrid linebacker type of player without having to move George Iloka or Sean Williams out of their natural positions. Because, frankly, Jaron Smith isn't reliable enough on the back end or as a hybrid linebacker to play significant snaps, I would say. I mean, the one play I even noticed him on the field this year was the one where Jason Witten stiff-armed him into a different zip code. And so, I mean, I love the potential of the Jaron Smith signing or the drafting that they had, but he's still not ready. And I don't know, man. I think that Taylor Mays could be an interesting guy.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about that earlier when we started this topic, and when we were talking about the tight end issue. But every time Taylor Mays gives fans and the coaches hope, either he gets hurt, he gets suspended, he ends up having a poor game, whatever the case may be. I've always been a Taylor Mays guy, and for those of you who have listened and read a lot of my stuff over the years, I've always been a Taylor Mays guy, but he has just not put it together at the NFL level. I think he could be a good niche player. I agree with you, Connor, but he was a guy they signed this offseason. He had a 4-game suspension. Then I think it extended into an 8-game suspension, so he just might now be eligible. So the Bengals might sniff around him. But with Reese, you could see Hewitt and Reese in the same formation potentially. Hewitt kind of as an extra tight end. Reese as the fullback. I like certain things about it. I just don't like – I don't know where the fit is. And you'd have to probably get creative in order to get him involved in the ways that he was involved in Oakland. And Connor, I do agree with you. I don't think he was the same guy last year, but I do think – that has to do with a regime change in Jack Del Rio. That probably has to do with Derek Carr kind of becoming the quarterback, whereas in those first handful of years, there was a quarterback carousel, and these poorer quarterbacks really relied on him more to be one of the bigger weapons in this offense. And then, the Raiders invested in Michael Crabtree, Amari Cooper, and all these other guys, and Reese maybe fell by the wayside a little bit. But I do think it's an interesting situation. We'll see what plays out with all of these guys we've discussed. And the Bengals could make some moves to potentially change the course. What they hope is changing the course of how their 2016 season has gone so far.